It's called Marcellus Shale, and it contains enough natural gas to supply all U.S. gas needs for 14 years. But gas development here can be a catastrophe in the making. Toxic chemicals and methane gas seep into drinking water. And now, experts fear something worse: radioactive radium in waste products. The gas business may be booming, but at what price for people? Britain's Ecologist TV explores the social and ecological consequences of gas extraction in the Marcellus Shale in this original investigative report.
This is Bradford County, northeastern Pennsylvania. This previously quiet corner of America is now at the center of a rush for natural gas, extracted through a new drilling technology called hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking. But as the ecologist discovered, fracking is a high-risk process that threatens to both destroy the environment and wreck lives.
It makes me mad. It makes me very mad. Because my life is over without my water.
There was just like this red, nasty water just coming, just oozing out the side of the mountain, just the side of the hill.
And now hydraulic fracturing is heading for Europe. The UK, Poland, France and Germany are all next in the frack firing line. This is a picture postcard part of America, but beneath these rolling hills lies a seam of gas-rich rock called Marcellus Shale. But the shale gas is far from easily accessible.
The process itself is that you drill down a few thousand feet into a layer of very dense shale, turn the well horizontally, go out and perform some other operations. Eventually you set off charges that blow holes in the pipe, and then you fill up the pipe with a liquid. And the intent is basically to get sand back in the cracks of the rock to hold it apart so the gas will flow.
Gas drilling sites, or frack pads as they are known, have begun to appear all over the countryside, but these are just the tip of the iceberg. Professor Tony Ingraffia is one of the world's leading pioneers of fracture mechanics.
The fact is that Pennsylvania is 3 years into a 30-year large-scale industrial development. There are fewer than 2,000 Marcellus wells in Pennsylvania right now, but they're drilling them at the rate of 4 to 5 per day, and the rate at which they're being drilled is increasing. The industry intends to drill between 3,000 and 5,000 wells per year for the next 30 years in Pennsylvania, and if they get their way, in New York.
With many farmers struggling to remain profitable, the large royalty payments offered for land means that many are readily selling off their mineral rights. For others, there is also the promise of new jobs. And on a national level, it is argued that shale gas is a step towards energy independence. But in the rush to drill, concerns about the potential risks of fracking are being swept aside.
When I first heard about shale drilling, it sounded like a pretty good idea. The thing that really got me interested and concerned was I found out that under the proposed regulations for New York State, you could drill a gas well 150 feet from this river or the lake that feeds it, which is the water source for this village. And that's just insane.
One of the first problems observed in communities close to intensive fracking sites has been the contamination of domestic water supplies. The ecologist spoke to families who have been unable to drink water from the tap since the gas companies started fracking on land close to their homes.
And I didn't tell Ronnie anything about it until probably a couple days later because it got worse. I thought maybe this will go away. I don't know what it is, but it didn't. And I said to him, I said, you know, we have a problem with our water. Water is a commodity. You might not think it is when you have it and it's good, but when you lose it, it's gone. You'll never get it back. Like we would take a glass of water out of the tap and it would have like an oil base on the top. You could smell it. It would smell like diesel fuel or some kind of oil thing. You know, I used to go to my sink and get a glass of water. I can't do that anymore. I have to put lotion on my hands 3 times a day from using the water. Even wash my dishes or wash my clothes or anything.
Meanwhile, increased levels of methane gas in water supplies have been reported in areas of intensive drilling.
This is the water that's in my well, and supposedly I'm supposed to be drinking it.
One of the key problems with the fracking process is its reliance upon huge volumes of water that are combined with an array of harmful chemicals. Carolyn Knapp is an organic farmer.
I don't believe that they should be allowed to put chemicals into my ground, chemicals that are not allowed by my certification to be put in the ground, chemicals that I feel can do harm to my family, to the people around me, and I feel violated.
None of those chemicals are potable. methanol, hydrochloric acid, ethylene glycol. It's about 0.5% of the fracking fluid is a chemical, or is it really a cocktail of chemicals? And but do the math on that. That means that that's 5,000 gallons per well is chemicals, or toxic chemicals that goes in. So if there's 8 wells per pad site, that's 40,000 gallons of toxic chemicals.
We're losing farms far too quickly as it is, and to have one more circumstance that makes us lose the farms quicker is all the quicker that they'll be gone. There will be no more small family farms.
The rush for gas has had other effects on the local community. Small towns have become clogged with gas industry trucks.
I have to say, the days of having a nice conversation sitting out in front of the diner are long gone. Main Street's noisier and louder now than ever as a result of the large trucks that the industry requires. They run nonstop 24 hours a day through town, and yeah, the noise is louder than ever.
Whilst the increase in traffic represents an inconvenience for local people, the high volume of trucks point to far more serious problems.
Once the chemicals are injected and the fracturing process is complete, a large percentage of that fluid comes back up. So we have purposely polluted large quantities of fresh water with chemicals that do not belong in the human environment. And now we have the responsibility, the industry and the landowners have a responsibility to dispose of them properly. But we're talking enormous quantities.
Whereas energy-rich Texas has over 11,000 disposal wells, the temperate geography of Pennsylvania means that only a few exist, hardly enough to cater for the thousands of wells planned in coming years. But the safe disposal of frack fluid is not the only concern.
The amount of fluid that's running around out there, literally, in tanker trucks, thousands of tanker trucks, is such that one tanker truck going off the road with fracking chemicals in it into a river would pretty much wipe it out. This is like taking that rough and tumble, highly industrialized activity and plopping it right down in the Cotswolds. Maybe not such a good idea.
Truman Burnett's retirement dream has been destroyed after a gas industry truck spilled a small amount of polluted frack water onto his property.
My wife had some health problems, and this was her recovery area, and we had a little bit of heaven. The only thing you heard at nighttime here was your heartbeat. Now it's just totally devastated. And the water dumped out, down off their pad, down across my land, into my pond, through the pond and into the wetland here alongside me. And what it did, it killed the pond, killed the fish, killed everything in the pond. No frogs, no turtles, nothing. Our drinking water in our house has high concentrations of lead. They've recommended it, or they've told us not to drink it and don't bathe in it. From our heaven, now it's turned into our hell.
The estimate of the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Preservation is 1 serious environmental concern for every 150 wells drilled to date. You do the math. If we're talking hundreds of thousands of wells, we're doing hundreds or thousands of spills. That's called cumulative impact. So it goes to the heart of your question. Why are you not seeing all these things yet? Because the cumulative impact is accumulating. Come back in 10 years.
The ecologist met with an ex-gas industry employee who described a spill on a site that he worked on.
Some of the sites are well regulated, yeah, where DEP and OSHA and stuff like that, where they're right on them and stuff, yeah, they're well regulated. But the rest of the 95% of them, where they're not going to go out to the site and look at them, no, no, they're not well regulated. Some of them are real bad. I've seen chemicals come out of the side, literally the side. It looked like the mountain was bleeding. It looks like a plateau. They had the pad here, and they had like the barrier fence around it, and there was just like this red, nasty water just coming, just oozing out the side of the mountain, just the side of the hill. So they're not doing something right.
But a toxic cocktail of chemicals is not the only worrying component in frack wastewater. Critics argue it could contain far more dangerous substances.
These shale deposits are rich in radium, radium-226. The level of radium in the Marcellus is about 267 times the safe disposal amount, meaning it'll kill you. So there's anecdotal evidence that these frack fluids will leach uranium out of these shale deposits. There's also radon in these shale deposits. So in addition to the fracking fluid, which we know is toxic, the frack flowback leaches radium out of the shale. The radium is carcinogenic, and that's something that's being introduced to the surface in a spill that wasn't there before.
As the profile of the potential dangers of hydraulic fracturing grows, both public and experts are becoming increasingly concerned by the rapid expansion of fracking. But the gas industry have hit back with expensive ads, PR campaigns, and high-level lobbying.
It's the cost benefit of BS, of PR, of ads, and payoffs to politician is extraordinary. The return on investment of paying off a politician, running an ad, discrediting critics, it's one of the best investments that the industry can make.
Although they declined an opportunity to speak on camera, a spokesperson for the Marcellus Shale Coalition, which represents the gas industry, told The Ecologist that gas extracted from fracking is both safe and a panacea for America, offering a fuel that is both a cleaner and a more secure choice than relying on foreign energy supplies. But Professor Ingrafia disagrees.
Because in general, in the usage framework, oil and gas are not interchangeable. Petroleum is largely used for transportation. Natural gas is largely used for heating and for industrial activity. So until you can show me a plan as part of a national energy plan to transform our transportation system in the United States to one that uses natural gas, right, that argument is specious. Natural gas burns cleaner than any other fossil fuel, but it is not cleaner in its life cycle. Studies that are being done at Cornell University right now that are going to be released soon in peer-reviewed journals will show conclusively that the life cycle cost in terms of carbon dioxide emission and methane emission from the development of gas from unconventional sources like shale is at least as dirty as coal.
Professor Ingrafia is also concerned about unregulated fracturing practices spreading around the world.
Not only do we now have a technology that has exceeded our regulatory capacity, we have a government saying something that's ahead of the technology. So I'm really concerned about people in Europe, India, Asia, Africa, that they're going to jump into this again too soon without understanding completely what the implications of this use of technology are on environment and human health.
But despite the concerns of experts from across the spectrum, fracking in Pennsylvania is set to continue. Ralph Gisberg, a campaigner against the gas industry, offers a sober assessment.
You've got to realize the vast majority of people here think it's wonderful. They think there'll be jobs, they think they'll be able to keep their families here, they'll be able to pay for education. But we find, as you've seen when you talk to people, that all is good on paper, but when things happen that ruin the value of your property, ruin the health of your family, then that all goes out the window.
Hello, Will. How are you?
Nice to meet you.
You bet.
Thanks for having us.
You're kidding me. We have two rules of engagement up here today. No trespassing.
Right.
Incana will not hesitate to call the sheriff. Incana called the sheriff, tried to get me evicted from my property one time when I called him damaging my property. I used to take an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours to do the tour. I hope we can do it in an hour and maybe we won't get anybody sick. We were living the dream. It was magnificent. I mean, breathing the air here was like biting into a York peppermint patty. It was just wonderful. We could smell the cedars and the pinyons, and it was just terrific. And then Incana arrived. One day after Incana arrived, between like 5:30 in the morning and 6 o'clock in the afternoon, I counted 242 trucks went past my driveway. And there were actually many more than that during that 24-hour period because they started long before daylight and they continued way after 6 o'clock. I mean, it's 24/7, 365 when they come in. And the fracking causes a tremendous amount of fumes.
How do you survive living here?
Barely, just barely.
But what do you do to stay away from
We close our house up tight. Doors and windows. We can never leave doors and windows open. We have two serious problems if we do. We have this dust that is like powdered glass, and we have the fumes. And in 10 years, we have had hundreds of days that we could not go outside our house. And this stuff gets in your nose and your throat and your lungs, and you just burn from the tip of your nose to the bottom of your lungs. We cough up blood and we cough up mud.
You can usually smell the fumes and see the dust? Is that how you tell when you can?
There have been days that I could not see from my front porch to the road, which is 150 feet away.
Nobody's monitored the air? Nobody's even tried?
Aaron?
We did an air quality
Yep.
test a few months ago. Aaron did the test.
I used to work out here, so I know that, there's presence of chemicals, harmful chemicals in the air.
So what'd you find, Aaron?
Elevated levels of volatile organic compounds and presence of, well, we didn't show any presence of hydrogen sulfide gas at Thomason's property, but we did find hydrogen sulfide gas present in the air of Divide Creek and Mam Creek. We did a baseline test in Glenwood Springs and showed virtually no volatile organic compounds in the air, and we measured 40 times the amount here just at Thomas Thompson's, and 70 to 80 times higher than what our baseline showed up Divide Creek and Mam Creek.
It's inconvenient, it's dirty, it's noisy, it's invasive. It is also a revenue source, it's also a job source. It is also, again, assisting in the national energy policy as well.
How's your water?
We have to buy water from town. We drilled the well and we were about to start using the water when a water well was exploded right over there. Gas wells farther away from that water well blew up that water well. I mean, yeah. Oh yeah, had wonderful water, which is almost very unusual up here. So that got poisoned, and we had gas wells closer to us than the one that caused that. So we never used it. I'm not a gambler.
What do you mean blew it up?
I mean, it was like somebody dropped a stick of dynamite in it, blew the pump out of the ground, exploded the well, and permanently forever poisoned it. This was an Encana remote fracking compound. There would be a fleet of maybe 20 beautiful high-tech purple trucks from Bayou Fracking in Louisiana somewhere. Also, there would be a couple of big long flatbed trucks with big bags of sand. There were convoys of water tankers. And then the scary part were the bobtail trucks, these open back bobtail trucks that had hundreds and hundreds of 80 or 100 gallon plastic drums of hazardous liquids in there. Every drum that I saw on the backs of those trucks had some kind of a hazardous placard on it. Poisonous, flammable, caustic, whatever. And they would mix all of these chemicals, the liquid chemicals, with the sand and the water, and they would mix up this wonderful slurry, and then they would pump it along the road, starting from here at this remote fracking site. They pumped all of this mixture more than 3 miles uphill back in the valley here. When those pumps would start, even with the big walls on this thing, we could hear those pumps crank up from 1.5 miles away, just like they were next door to us. These things were tremendously powerful. Every 1/4 mile or so up the road, Encana had put up these signs this big, danger, high pressure pipeline, call this 800 number if you have a problem. When those pumps would start up, they pulsed, and these welded steel pipelines would bounce with the pulse. They'd bounce this high. Took them, I don't know, 2 or 3 months to build this compound down here, but it started pumping on March the 1st. These wells that were the site where this fluid is being pumped were another 1.25 miles or so behind us. Starting on March the 4th, the fumes from that hit us, and it was overpowering. I mean, night and day for 6 weeks. We could not go outside of our house. So this went on night and day, 7 days a week for 6 weeks.
With all the traffic, the road base is gone, the sub-road base is gone, and we're down to 3 inches of just hard dirt. We're in litigation right now about getting our roads fixed.
Back in 2004, there was a major explosion basically that happened on a well pad that led to cementing failure on a couple of other wells that were underway. That led to a huge fracking incident where the well actually extended far beyond fracking models and blew out and contaminated the shallow aquifer of West Divide Creek with benzene and toluene and xylene and all the constituents that come along with raw natural gas. In fact, they estimated about 115 million cubic feet went into the environment, both terrestrial and aquatic, and we had a major exodus of wildlife, and those that died escaped, and or rather those that didn't die escaped, and the ones that died were picked over by vultures who themselves died, and so it was a horrible collapse of the chain, the web of life, basically in this area, and it had only begun to recover when something similar happened again in 2008. So, and we now have baseline data that shows that contamination is pretty significant, but unfortunately, that area, though it could have told a lot to the nation and a world whose attention is turned to the perils of fracking, that area should have been included in the EPA's 2012 fracking study, but under the advice of the Scientific Advisory Committee, it was denied.
And what was the reasoning for that?
They were very quiet about the reasoning, but I must only assume that it is because if the evidence is known, then action must be taken, and the industry must then, and all the politicians associated with the industry, must then acknowledge those risks and become accountable. And as we all are learning, that is something the industry and a number of politicians don't want to have to deal with.
Reduction in your property value is? Has anybody tried to assess that?
I'm thinking probably close to 60% so far.
Really?
Yeah.
60%?
Yeah.
Do you have any hard evidence, or is it just a...
Yeah. Our property appraised at $508,000. After that, we built a $40,000 workshop, and we put in a little barn, like an $11,000 barn. This appraisal we got just here a couple of months ago is about $280,000. If we had to leave, I doubt we could get anywhere near that. Okay. Well, on my property here, the gas pumps up out of the ground there, and then it goes underground here in a pipe, goes to this little monitoring shed. The data that monitoring equipment gathers is electronically transferred to the office.
That's the wellhead. That's the separator, and it catches your oil or your flowback / condensate from your gas.
Come on, Sarah Jean.
That's it. Is he okay?
In this little valley here, we have probably got 50 or more pads. I would imagine that the average is 10 wells per pad. So we've probably got somewhere between 300 and 500 wells in this valley, each and every one of them emitting toxins into the air every day. Our state organization here that we're supposed to ultimately turn to is the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. One of their representatives, he and I were talking about the big picture around here. We were talking about blown up water wells and poisoned creeks and herds of livestock dying, and an Encana guy had been killed on a rig back in our valley here. We were talking about pets dying of cancer, increasing cancer rates in children and seniors in particular. We were talking about all those things, and he, just very casually, he said those are acceptable losses.
In northeastern Ohio, work was suspended this week at 5 wells used to dispose of wastewater from oil and gas drilling. The suspension follows a dozen minor earthquakes in that area since last spring, and an earthquake expert believes the two could be related. We asked Michelle Miller to look into this.
This is the magnitude 4 earthquake, which occurred on New Year's Eve, very close to Youngstown, Ohio.
John Armbruster is a seismologist at Columbia University. Before March, there had not been a recorded earthquake in Youngstown, Ohio. Since then, there have been 11.
Never felt an earthquake before, and it was just an experience.
So Ohio state officials asked Armbruster to investigate.
These earthquakes were sitting there waiting to happen. We have triggered these earthquakes.
Armbruster believes the trigger was this Youngstown well that disposes of contaminated water trucked in from Pennsylvania and beyond. The water is a byproduct of oil and natural gas extraction called fracking. The disposal well pumps thousands of gallons of the waste into rock a mile or more below. Armbruster says the fluid may have made its way into an earthquake fault line.
Pumping the fluid into the fault encourages the fault to slip.
Armbruster says seismic readings allowed him to pinpoint the epicenter of the quake near the Youngstown well.
It was about a kilometer from the bottom of the disposal well.
But drilling companies and some scientists are skeptical. 177 similar wells in Ohio have operated without incident. The technique has been used since the 1930s in more than 100,000 wells across the nation. Tom Stewart is with the Ohio Oil and Gas Association.
It has happened with regulatory certainty, regulatory excellence, and it's the best way to take care of this waste stream.
Clusters of small earthquakes near wells in Oklahoma, Texas, and Arkansas have also drawn scrutiny. Art McGarr is with the U.S. Geological Survey.
First of all, the location of the earthquakes is quite close to the wells. Secondly, the timing of the wastewater injection also coincides with the earthquakes.
As for Ohio, officials have shut down the Youngstown well until they can be certain of the risks.
News.